Good morning. It's Wendy Conrad, Work Culture Developer, Certified Chief Happiness Officer, and founder of Your Happy Workplace. And today, returning guest Maureen Ake. Can't wait for this conversation today. So needed. When we scheduled this, the topic was working in a pandemic, how it's affecting our mental health. But there's so many other things going on with us collectively that are affecting our mental health. It's affecting our focus. There's a level of expectation for us at work. Is it reasonable? Is it not? So today we're going to be talking about all of that with Maureen and so much more, to ask her questions about, when these things are happening, what can we do as business leaders? What should we be doing as business leaders? How can we kind of navigate through this time when, yes, there's so much that is distracting us, and also we have responsibilities and we have families to take care of. So how do we do all of that and take care of ourselves at the same time? Right, Maureen?
Right, Wendy. What the heck?
Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you.
I feel like us scheduling this was kind of kismet at this point in time.
I know.
So let me introduce you, and then we're going to dig right in, because I have a feeling we're going to go over half an hour today. You are a licensed marriage and family therapist. You have your master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Nova Southeastern, transformational life coach certification, and you started the Stuart Center in downtown Stuart for couples and families in 2018. Welcome back. So happy to have you here today. I have so many things to say, as I'm sure you do too.
Yes.
So let's dive right in. First, I want to, because we've talked several times before, just briefly review a little bit about the effects of chronic stress on our brains and us physically, because that's what we're dealing with. So just talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to get into some more specifics.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the effects of chronic stress, our bodies naturally have cortisol, which is an important aspect. It's an important part of our system, and it normally keeps things pretty level. However, when we have a lot of stress and we have chronic stress, that cortisol goes into our system and it puts it into overdrive. And that constant effect of cortisol in our body results in so many negative things that happen, primarily inflammation, anxiety, depression, headaches, heart disease, problems with memory and concentration,
effects on your immune system,
effects on your immune system, effects on your digestion, trouble sleeping, and weight gain. Yes. So it has chronic stress over time, and we can say now that this has been over time. This is not a one and done kind of thing, right? We've been in the pandemic now since Florida, I'll just speak for Florida, has been in the pandemic since March 16th, March 17th, right around there. So we're coming to a year, and it's been chronic stress every single day for many, many people. And so that chronic stress is really wreaking havoc on our systems.
Yes. So I talked a little bit in the beginning how when we originally planned this, the topic was working in a pandemic, how it's affecting our mental health. But there's so many, that seems so like, there's so many other things that we have to be stressed out about. So when things outside of our organizations are causing collective stress, how can leaders and how should they be responding to that?
Number one, leaders, in my opinion, need to be looking for more information. They need to be looking for how all of these things can potentially affect their businesses, their employees, I think an effective leader, a caring leader would be doing that right now. It would be doing research, it would be doing more understanding. It would be a great leader would be checking in individually with each and every employee. So say you have thousands and thousands of employees. Okay, that's why you have HR. Have HR check in with all of them, because I think that right now, what people want to be seen, people want to be heard, people want to be listened to and felt and respected. And right now, that's what I think business leaders should be doing primarily.
And so what would you say to the people out there who are like, come on, everybody, let's stay focused. Let's get our work done. We can't be worried about that right now. Just stay focused. What would you say to those?
I think that you're going to, number one, probably get some turnover. You will not have productive employees. Your bottom line will be, it will be eliminated because people won't want to work for you. People will be emotionally and mentally checking out when you cannot see them as a human.
Yes. And I talk about that all the time. You can't check your humanity at the door as soon as your workday starts.
You can't.
And if you are in a leadership role and expecting your team to do that, hold on to your hats, because you're only doing not just them a disservice, but your whole organization a disservice. So I think it's so important to have the uncomfortable conversations and not pretend like it's business as usual.
Right.
But also make space for joy too. Talk a little bit about that, because that's a struggle that I have, where all of these things, it feels like the world is on fire. I know, because I talk about it, how important it is to incorporate joy and happiness and stuff for yourself into your day. But when I try to do it, it feels wrong.
Right. It can sometimes feel inauthentic. I talk about this with couples, and the Gottmans have a really great way of saying it, finding the silver linings. And I equate it to, like, if your house is burning down, you don't say, yay, the house is burning, right? You say, holy crap, our house is burning down. At least we have insurance, right? Mm-hmm. You find one small silver lining that can help alleviate some aspect of pain. So what can business leaders be doing? They can continue to highlight the good that's going on within their work. They can continue to highlight who's being the most helpful, who's being the most listening, they can highlight their employees in a much more human way, as opposed to like, you're being the most productive. It's like just highlighting your employees in a different way and making note of that, and sending out an email. Hey, Wendy did this for 3 of her coworkers. Isn't that awesome? Right? So just by trying to find some morale and highlight that.
Yeah, and talk a little bit too about kind of maybe the opposite end of that, which is, how does it affect the psyche when we do it to ourselves, and when it's kind of being done to us, maybe an expectation at work where we are trying to pretend like nothing is happening and not addressing it, or even a further extreme, the toxic positivity, no negativity here, come on, let's stay happy. And
right.
Talk a little bit about that and what that does to us.
So what that does to us, when we continue to only speak negatively or only think negatively, that's what our thoughts become. Our thoughts become our reality, right? So if we're thinking all of this is, if we go down that rabbit hole, tell me if I'm getting off topic here, but if we go down the rabbit hole of negativity, it can really lead us to a reality of negativity and of isolation. And we fail then to see moments of opportunities of change or of potential good, even if it's momentary. I'm not trying to talk forever, and I'm not trying to talk toxic positivity. What I am trying to say is, though, that if we continue to get into that anxiety cycle of the what ifs, right? Because that's what anxiety is. It's that big what if, like, well, what if this happens, and then this happens, and then all of this, and then at the end of that big what if, it's horrible and catastrophic.
Yes.
So, personally, and as any kind of business leader, you want to face the reality with what it is, and address it that way. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But I did just want to touch on toxic positivity, because I think people feel like that's an effective strategy when it's
No,
really not. And so
no,
speaking
it's
of
not.
strategies, so as people may or may not know, I'm working on this stress workshop that I'm building. And in that, I thought, we have, especially for those of us who are here in Florida, we have preparedness plans for hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
We have evacuation plans for fires. What do you think about the idea of having kind of an organizational crisis plan when something like last Wednesday happens? And when people come into the workplace, if you are working in person on Thursday, will not be, I know for me, as soon as I turned on the news and saw that the Capitol was being stormed, I knew I wasn't going to be able to focus on work for the rest of the day.
Right.
And I gave myself permission to do that.
Yes.
So what to have a kind of crisis plan for something like that event. What do you think of that idea, and what should be kind of included in that?
I think that that's a fantastic idea. So when I worked in Washington, D.C., I worked at a nonprofit. We made food for people with all kinds of illnesses. And we had prepared plans for every single thing possible, especially because we lived in Washington, D.C. And so I think that that's a great idea. I think some things that can be put into that locally or on a wider level would be being able to have people come in and educate about what's really going on, or having people come in as a therapist or a mental health professional, and just having that on hand when available, or you give them like a free subscription to BetterHealth. I don't, some kind of online therapy so that you could be able to pay for, like, as a business, and probably maybe you can contact one of those online companies just to see. But I think having some form of mental health wellness or like what we're talking about with what happened last
resources
week. Certain resources, just so you can have those on hand so people can process through, as opposed to swallowing all of their feelings and not working through. A few of my friends still live in DC, and a lot of their businesses had to close that day, and a lot of their business managers gave them the rest of the day off, and then the morning to process and have helped them in other ways. So I think that businesses here need to be open to that.
Yeah. I think having kind of a response plan in place, including all the things that you mentioned, and also things like being flexible with maybe production expectations, and everybody's going to deal with it in a different way. So being empathetic to that, and realizing that this is traumatic, it's stressful, and it moves our focus away from what we're trying to do, and trying to force it back to that productivity,
it's not going to work.
It's toxic and it's futile, as we would say in the Star Trek world. Resistance is futile.
I think having more compassion and empathy during these kinds of times, where I think people are only thinking about their bottom line, but their bottom line has so much to do with their employees and what's going on. And so I think that we need to see that as a systemic thing, and it's not linear. It's all continuously patterning within.
Yes. So I wanted to talk too, the original plan was kind of focused around the pandemic, touch a little bit on kind of new mental health issues that are coming up as a result, and existing issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Things like, people feeling isolated, Zoom fatigue, feeling disconnected, trying to manage a change in workload, all these kinds of things happening at once on top of everything else that's happening in the world. And you and I talked a little bit about this, and I did some research. You said you had an increase in your practice after the onset of the pandemic, and I'm sure that's continuing.
Yes.
Nationwide, suicide hotlines, 47% increase in suicide hotlines. So this is not something to ignore and to kind of address. So talking about pandemic specific things like isolation and feeling disconnected, what can leaders do can kind of address those kinds of things, especially if they're working remotely?
So there's also been a raise in alcohol consumption, drug use, family discord. There's been a rise in abuse within family systems. It's underreported, or it was more underreported earlier because there were no kids going to school or people being seen, but it's being reported a little bit more now. But those are some additional ones. So your question is, what can people do? What can we do as people, or what can business
What can
leaders
do, knowing that these things are out there, particularly with the isolation and the feeling disconnected part with their teams? And that can be whether they're working in person or remotely. I'm sure people who are working in person are also feeling some types of isolation and disconnection.
Yeah.
What can they kind of do to address those things with their team members?
I think leaders can start with empathy and compassion, right? Asking, like, are you okay? I read earlier when someone's employer said, "Are you okay?" I just shrugged it off and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then their employer wouldn't let them leave until they really actually talked about what was going on, because the employer could see that there was a decline. So I think it's up to the employers or HR or whatever kind of size company that you have to continue check-ins with your employees. In terms of isolation or feeling alone or disconnected, creating perhaps some kind of interconnectedness of in Buddha and the Badass. I know that. Have you read that yet? It's so
not
good.
yet.
It's so good. But I know that in Buddha and the Badass, obviously this wasn't a thing then, but they talked about having an interconnected play with employees. So like doing like little letters to each other, creating more connectedness, doing very small gifts that don't require a financial amount, but some kind of interconnected play between other people that make it feel a little bit more connected, that make it, or you can do some kinds of activities which increase more verbal communication as opposed to just about work, but it's about other stuff too.
Yeah, yeah. So talk a little bit about self-care, the big buzzword now.
Okay, right.
What are some things we can be doing for ourselves when things like, all these pandemic-related stressors and events are happening in the world? What are some things we can do for ourselves when these kind of collective stressors are happening?
First of all, be aware of what you're putting into your brain, right? So if you need to reduce social media use, reduce news use, right? Because any kind of news, it has a specific spin on it, and it sensationalizes quite a few things. So you need to be aware of how that affects you. And so you want to make sure that you're not overdosing or doom scrolling,
yes.
Right? That's number one, because a lot
Guilty.
Yeah. And so a lot of what we do when we doom scroll, we go through and go through and go through, and then it's like, oh my God, we're all dying. This is the end of the world. And then there's very little coming back from that, right?
Yeah.
So other ways for self-care, knowing your boundaries, going outside. I'm not talking about going and running a marathon right now, but I'm saying go outside, take a walk, get some sun, lay in the grass, right? It doesn't require much, but it requires a hair of an effort to be present enough to say, I'm doom scrolling, I need to get out of this, right? Yeah. Self-care also, this sounds ridiculous, but I'm going to say it. Laugh therapy and dance therapy.
Yeah.
So put on some comedy and laugh your butt off until you can't even take it because your cheeks hurt so much, right? Laughing provides good endorphins, right? Endorphins make us happy. Right. So we want to make sure that we are still feeling some other kinds of human emotions rather than sadness, rather than overwhelm or frustration or anger. Okay. So we need to be aware, I'm feeling sad. What's an antidote to sadness, right? What's my medicine for that? If it's still staying in the sad and processing your feelings, then do that. And afterwards, do some laugh therapy. Look it up online. Laugh. It sounds artificial and ridiculous, but laugh therapy, dance therapy, meditation. Yesterday, my kids were, I have a Peloton app. And so my kids like, I want to do a Peloton. They're 6 and 8. But first they were doing, some weights and stuff like that. And then my littlest one put on a meditation app and he just sat there for 10 minutes, just unwinding. And so stuff like that. If you are not in a position of seeing friends and family and your health is at risk and you're, still following guidelines and things like that for distancing, then I know that you talked about Zoom overwhelm, but even just scheduling regular times to connect with family members or friends. I have a roommate chat. My roommate's from college, so we're 20 years friends. And so we check in with each other every single week. We show each other pictures. I organized my pantry yesterday. And so
I'm jelly. I'm jelly.
And so we just show each other things like that just to check in and to have a little bit of a laugh.
Yes, I love all of that. And speaking of
Yes.
dance, somebody introduced me to the Fitness Marshal. If you're not aware of the Fitness Marshal,
I'm writing that down.
He has like little mini dance workout videos on YouTube. So good and so fun. I'm scheduling them in my calendar, like their business meeting, because that is a great break. And I think that brings up a good point about, like I said before, I have a hard time and I struggle with, being angry about what's going on in the world and all of that and wanting to be active in that way, but also knowing that I need to take a break from that and schedule joy and not feel guilty about it. So sometimes what I like to try and do, it's a struggle, is say, okay, I'm going to watch the news for half an hour and let myself be pissed off for half an hour. And then I'm going to move on to this and do this, something joyful, and kind of to balance it out.
Yes.
So I think for me, that's something that kind of works. And to speak to what you said about the self-care, I think it's so important for us as individuals to give ourselves permission to do that, but also as leaders to give ourselves permission to do that and give our teams permission to do that, because we can't be effective leaders if we're not participating in our own self-care. That is so important.
I want to piggyback on that for a second. And I want to also talk about educators for just a moment.
Yes.
Because I think that educators are in such a position about requirements to be back in school or to be teaching, and then also to be present and a vessel for youth or for teenagers or for adults that are still in the education systems. And so I think that there's a special need for teachers to give space and empathy for people who are struggling, and for, the education system to give space for teachers and educators, because it's a hard line to be walking. It's very challenging right now.
Yes. And that makes me think of, one of the other unique pandemic related stresses, which I've spoken to people who have this, where they're expected to be present physically at work. And then you have this anxiety about being infected with coronavirus when you are, as a part of your job, have to interact with people and be around people.
Yeah.
So I can feel for teachers and anybody else who does not have the privilege or luxury or given the flexibility by their employer to work from home in that way. So that's like a huge stressor too.
Yeah.
So what other tips would you give organizational leaders and individuals during this time to kind of help lead their teams through and make space for, our humanity, and also trying to just make it through the day? We've got responsibilities, we've got families, to kind of balance all of that.
Are you talking pandemic related, or are you talking social justice issues now?
All of it. It just seems like it just keeps raining down on us.
Right.
There's no relief. So, so we've got, even if somebody was taking care of us full time and we had to deal with all of these things, that is a struggle. But, we've got kids, we've got families, we've got jobs, we've got mortgages. It's like there's no let up. How do where's the light at the end of the tunnel, Maureen?
So I think that this is all in our perspective. This is tough. I don't think, in some ways, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better in many different situations. And I am in a position, and I am privileged right now, and I acknowledge my privilege to say I'm aware of it and I am okay with it. That's my privilege to say that, right? Because a lot of people don't have that privilege. You know what I mean? Um, I am welcoming change, and I am hoping that we welcome change also within our society. It seems like, is our connection breaking up?
It got a little iffy there for a second, but it's coming back.
Okay. All right. Because you're a little pixelated.
Yeah, you are too.
Oh, okay.
But I can hear you still, so.
Okay. So I think this year, especially, or where we are right now, for being an employee or an employer and being on any end of the spectrum of our belief systems, it's about remaining open. And it's about remaining open to dialogue. And I think that so much so beforehand, there were a lot of businesses that said it's either my way or the highway. And I think that businesses, and I think that people are learning that it's not so concrete and it's not so linear, that we need to be open to dialogue. We need to be open to change. We need to be open to more flexibility and frequencies, because if we're so rigid, it's not going to work.
Yes, yes. I came across this article and I wanted to read this quote because it says so much. It's just a paragraph, but this is from Laura Mazzullo, who is from a company called Eastside Staffing. This was an article that I saw on an organization called Talent. They're at tlnt.com. But she says, I believe surviving a pandemic is a collective trauma and that human beings have a variety of trauma responses. These come into the workplace. Compound that with institutional racism, civil unrest, national safety concerns, and we cannot expect employees to show up without being psychologically and emotionally impacted.
Yes.
We need to normalize therapy and psychological treatment and make sure they're being offered to employees so that people are getting the care they need to be their most healthy selves in mind, body, and spirit. No Zoom meeting is going to fix this.
Yes.
Woo! So much said there. I got chills when I was reading that.
I feel it.
That is, you know, I'm going to tell a little anecdote here. When I decided to get therapy for myself and explored my options insurance-wise and called up my insurance company, was surprised to learn that therapy with a licensed psychologist was 100% covered through my insurance.
Wow.
I did not know that. And had I known that, I probably would have gone sooner. So these are the kinds of things that you need to make your team aware of. Explore what your insurance covers. Be a resource for them so they can get help. As far as I'm concerned, everybody can benefit from therapy. You don't need to be in some kind of existential crisis to benefit from it. And now when we do have all of these stressors coming at us on a daily basis, it's certainly so much needed right now.
Yes.
So talk a little bit before we wrap it up. How can we make it easier to normalize this in the world and in our workplaces?
If you go to therapy, talk about going to therapy. Number one, that's like the number one thing in normalizing therapy. I am a therapist. I went to therapy and I have a therapist. Okay. It does not mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you take responsibility for your thoughts. Yes. Right? So number one, normalize therapy. What else can we do to spread therapy? We can continue to it has such a stigma.
Destigmatize,
right? Destigmatize the idea. So when your friend says, hey, I'm going to therapy, oh, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Right? We don't do that. Really, I'm so happy for you. How can I support you? Is there anything you want to talk about? Right? It's by being an open vessel for them in their experience, as opposed to making it stagnant and not having a two-way conversation.
And just to kind of acknowledge our own bias and check it in our own brain when we do hear people saying they go to therapy. Because I was doing it to myself. And even just saying that little story right there about how I went to therapy, I still felt a little in my stomach saying that out loud. But these are the kinds of conversations we need to be having. It's not, like you said, it doesn't mean you're crazy or whatever. No. We need to check those biases in our brains.
100%. The more we check those biases, the more we're available to move through them, the less judgment we have on ourselves and other people who just want to go and talk to someone, right? So that to me is so, so important. Just sharing, taking away the stigma, and being open to your friends. Also, I would say if you're interested in any kind of therapy or feel like therapy might benefit you in one way, shape, or form, look it up. Look at how beneficial therapy can be. I hear so many stories from people like, wow, I didn't know that this was what therapy is. Had I known, I would have done it sooner. Like, nothing crazy happens except nothing crazy happens in here except you just learning more about yourself. You just uncovering some of your own thoughts and being a judgment-free zone. That's what happens.
Yeah. And this, a scene from The Golden Girls just came up in my brain where Dorothy is saying, it's really just like talking to a trusted friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all it is. And that's not a scary thing. So with that, tell everybody out there where they can find you, how they can work with you, and if you've got anything coming up that you want to promote. Talk about your from the chair things, because I'm fascinated by those. I love
Thanks. So you can find me on M_Ake Therapy on Instagram, where I am here. And so I'm starting a series called From the Chair, and it's like 10 minutes or less of me just talking about topics that I think are super important. Self-care, about self-judgment, just about little things that go back and forth about personal autonomy and taking responsibility for your thoughts and not being a victim to what's going on in your life. So I'm starting
and that's here on Instagram.
Yeah, here on Instagram. And if you want to hear more, DM me and say, hey, Maureen, can you talk about this topic? So that's where I am. I'm also on Facebook, and today I posted just some things about the LMFT, which is the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, and what they are speaking on right now, currently with the current climate of racism, and how it is our job, it's our professional job as therapists to combat any kind of systemic problems that we can potentially have an impact upon. And we see how systemic racism is really violently hurting our system right now. So I posted on there today on my work webpage. I'm also writing a book. The book is completed, and creating a online web series about personal health, and it's called Heart Surgery in 21 Weeks: How to Better Your Heart and Your Brain for your own personal love.
Ooh, I love that, and so needed right now.
Right,
yes,
right.
Yes. So thank you for hopping on with me today. It's always wonderful to have you. I think the timing couldn't have been better. I'm sure we're going to have plenty more to talk about.
I could go on for so much longer.
Yes, I have so many things we didn't even get to, but we'll do it again, I'm sure. So thanks, Maureen. For those of you who are finding this Instagram Live via Maureen, I am Wendy Conrad, work culture developer, founder of Your Happy Workplace. I have a workshop coming up, Understanding, Reducing, and Managing Stress in the Workplace. There's a link in my bio if you want to check that out for all you business leaders and organizations out there. I think it will help you tremendously. Now more than ever, my favorite phrase from all the commercials. Thanks, Maureen, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
You too.